Okay, what we're talking about today is something in Congress called Incumbency Advantage. And an incumbent is someone who's already in office running for re-election. And generally, incumbents in the House, when they run for re-election every 2 years, they get re-elected at a rate of about 90 to 95%. So usually once you're elected once, if you keep running, you're going to get elected over and over again. In the Senate, it's a little bit lower, but it's still about 70 to 75%, so still pretty high. On the other hand, when you ask Americans, do you approve of how Congress is doing their job? Right now it's at like 20-something%. It hasn't been above 30% in something like 15 years. And a lot of times it's down in the teens. So on the one hand, we very strongly don't like the job that Congress is doing, and that's been true for 10, 15 years at least. But we keep sending the same people back to Congress over and over again. So what we're going to look at is why that is. Why is it that incumbents tend to win re-election, even though for the most part Americans are generally usually unhappy with the way Congress has done their job. So one reason why incumbents tend to get re-elected name recognition. People tend to vote for names that they've heard of. And if you're in Congress, then people are more likely to have heard of you because you're on TV or you've got a presence on the internet or something like that. Elaine Luria did an event with my daughter. My daughter organized a few weeks ago. I think I showed you that in class about women in politics. And we really appreciated her doing it. It also, for Elaine Luria, it got her on television on Levy and got her, her face and her name out there. And if you've heard of somebody, you're more likely to vote for that person than you are to vote for somebody you never heard of before. Second, incumbents raise more money than challengers do. Once you're in Congress, it's a lot easier to raise money from people and from PACs and from all these other places where they get money than it is if you're a challenger. Why? Well, in large part because incumbents win. People want to give money to somebody they think is going to win the election, and incumbents win elections, and part of the reason they win elections is because it's easier for them to raise money. So it's like a big cycle. And there's something called the sophomore surge, where the second time you run for Congress, the first time you're a challenger, you're not in office. The second time, the first time you run as an incumbent, it's called the sophomore surge. Your fundraising goes ways up. It's easier to raise money. So money has a lot to do with it. Credit claiming. It's easier for somebody in Congress to say, hey, look what I did for you. Remember a couple years ago, I got this bill passed that really helped Virginia Beach. I brought money to the oceanfront somehow, or something like that. Remember that when you go to vote this November. It's a challenger can say, hey, look what I'm going to do for you if you elect me, but that doesn't have quite the same pull as saying, hey, remember when I did this a couple years ago, when I did whatever for the area or for you or for the constituents. Kind of related to that is casework. Casework is favors done for constituents, and so it's not really votes on laws, passing bills. It's more sort of personal favors that a congressman or congresswoman can do for a constituent that's going to make the constituent more likely to vote for them. Things like writing a recommendation to the Naval Academy, arranging a tour of the Capitol if you go to DC, sending you an American flag, helping you with a recommendation for a scholarship. If you have trouble getting your Social Security check, maybe somebody in the congressperson's office calls down the Social Security agency and helps you. So it's sort of favors that Congress people can do for constituents that will make you more likely to vote for them because you remember when they helped you out. A challenger can say, hey, if you elect me, I will do this, but again, that doesn't have quite the same attraction. The franking privilege, that just means if you're in Congress, you can mail out sort of work Congress-related things for free. So you can send out an update to the 2nd District on everything Elaine Lurie has been up to that relates to credit claiming and to all these other things, and that's for free. You don't have to pay for the mailing. That's that's taxpayer money, so that's kind of an advantage too. And then the last one that only applies to the House is called gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is, we're going to talk more about this in class, but it's drawing the lines of a district to help an incumbent or his or her party. The House district lines are drawn by the Virginia state legislature. And so there's Virginia, and let's say that there's a lot of Republican voters who live in this area. There's a lot of Democratic voters who live there. And let's say that Elaine Lurie lives like right there. As a Democrat, she's going to have a hard time getting elected because she's living in a district mostly with Republicans. But if the Virginia legislature were to redraw the line to make it look like that, then suddenly she's in a district with mostly Democrats, and it's going to be a lot easier for her to get reelected. And so a lot of times what happens is state legislatures will draw lines in what they call a safe district. They'll draw district lines that put overwhelmingly all Democrats or all Republicans into a particular district, which means whichever candidate from that party is almost always going to win, which helps to explain this weight in the House. That doesn't apply to the Senate. There are no district lines in the Senate. You run for the state, and the state lines don't change. But in the House, that could help explain this 95%. And then lastly, the incumbent re-election rate in the House is about 95%. In the Senate, it's about 75%. Why is that lower? A couple reasons why that might be lower. First of all, as we just talked about, there's no gerrymandering in Senate races. You can't change a state border line. It is where it is. So they don't get that same kind of advantage. Because senators represent a bigger area with more people, they're going to have less personal contact with voters than people in the House. Elaine Lurie can spend a lot of time in Virginia Beach and do a lot of events and meet a lot of voters here. It's harder for Tim Kaine or Mark Warner to meet everybody, a large percentage of voters in all of Virginia, just because it's bigger. So you don't get that same benefit from kind of name recognition or personal contact that you do in the House. And then lastly, a lot of times people who run for the House have never been in politics before, or they just, or they're not very well known in the area, so they're fighting that name recognition battle. The challengers in the House tend to be not as well funded, and also just not as well known. On the other hand, because the Senate is viewed as a bigger, more prestigious job, usually somebody running for the Senate is already pretty well known and has built up a network of donors and supporters. Before Tim Kaine and Mark Warner ran for the Senate, they had already been governor of Virginia, and so they were already well known to voters all over the state. So generally, challengers in Senate races tend to be a little bit better. Let me jump back for a minute to one more thing with district lines. Some limits on district lines. It is legal to draw a district line to try to help a party or to try to help a particular candidate. But there are a couple rules that you do have to follow when you draw district lines. One. All districts must have more or less the same number of people. It can't be exact because people are born and dying and moving all the time, but you can't have one district with 200 people and another with 2 million. They've all got to have more or less the same number of people. Second, race cannot be the predominant factor behind drawing the line. And the Supreme Court said that. You can't draw a line specifically for racial reasons because you want all the white voters together, or all the African American voters together, or all the Hispanic voters together. It can be sort of one reason of many, and race is often related to politics as political parties, as we've seen. African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans are more likely to vote Democratic, so race and politics is all mixed up, but you can't draw a district line primarily for racial reasons. And then lastly, districts have to be connected. So for example, if this is Virginia, you can't draw a district that's here, here, and here. It's got to be, it all fits together. Everybody in the district has to be touching everybody else. So it has to look something like that instead of that. So those are the only limits on drawing district lines. Other than that, the state legislatures can do whatever they want. And if that means trying to help a particular party, then that's what they're going to do. But we're going to talk more about gerrymandering in class.